Hello ladies and gentlemen, Top Hat Gaming Man here, the #1 console connoisseur you can encounter when surfing the digital waves of the futuristic information super spider web. Being the radical cyber dude that I am, Big Daddy Top Hat has given you a nourishing cornucopia of console content for you to consume. Recently, we have been looking a lot at one of the most pivotal years in gaming history, 1983. Whilst in North America, this particular year for gaming is remembered mostly for the Atari crash. In Japan, on the other hand, this year is remembered fondly for the beginning of the nation's video game boom, rather than a recession. 1983 marked the release of the Nintendo Famicom, the Nintendo Entertainment System's original form, and the Sega SG-1000, Sega's first home console and a precursor to the Master System. Away from this though, there was also a number of other platforms released that year in the region, such as the Atari 2800, which we covered last week, and the Epoch Super Cassette Vision, which we shall look at in the future. Today though, we have our eyes firmly set on another console from that fateful year. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the story of the Casio PV-1000. Yeah! In the early 1980s, Japan was a very different place. Whilst the country is culturally known today as one of the most important countries in the world when it comes to the world of game consoles, back then Japan were not quite yet to reach the status as giants in that global industry. The early foundations for this had still begun to be laid though, prior to the arrival of the hugely successful Nintendo and Sega systems. We can trace the roots of this back to 1966, when Sega introduced a simple electromechanical game called Periscope, which used light and plastic waves to simulate sinking ships from a submarine. The 1970s though would see Japanese gaming achievements which are still celebrated to this very day. And that is of course with the release of several highly lucrative arcade games, which received massive levels of popularity across the globe. These games include the likes of Space Invaders, Galaxian and Pac-Man, all titles which remain firm cornerstones of gaming history. Throughout this period, Japan would not receive a home console that would reach the same level of success as the Atari VCS over in the United States. The very first entry to the Japanese market was the Epoch TV Tennis Electro Tennis, which is a bit of a mouthful of a name, which was a licensed version of ping pong previously featured on the Magnavox Odyssey overseas. This was swiftly followed with the slightly more successful Color TV game systems created by Nintendo, which would each feature one title pre-programmed into their hardware. This early popularity would be a sign of what was to come for the Japanese console market down the line. As briefly touched on in a previous video, the first system with interchangeable cartridges to hit the Japanese market was the original Epoch Cassette Vision released in 1981. This cheap basic system offered enough to consumers to end up taking a 70% console market share. So, with all of this in mind, a console development race would begin to become the new kings of the early Japanese console market. Amongst the companies going for gold in the early days was Casio, a company we all know and love in the West for their calculators and digital watches. So being a successful electronics brand, it is of no surprise that the console market would have looked appealing to them. In terms of Casio themselves and the company's history, Casio was first established way back in 1946, and their first ever product had nothing to do with electronics. In fact, it was a quirky creation known as the Uiva pipe, a bizarre finger ring that held the user's cigarette. This product allowed the smoker to smoke the cigarette all the way down to the nub, blackening the user's lungs as much as physically possible with only one cigarette, all completely hands-free. This strange, very Japanese product was a massive success, due to the fact that cigarettes were very valuable to citizens at the time, as their country had become completely pulverised and impoverished over World War II. Company owner Casio first came across calculators at a business show in Tokyo in 1949 and quickly made the decision to use his money generated by the Uiba pipe to develop a range of calculators of their very own. As we all know, this entrepreneurial spirit paid off, as Casio are still one of the largest calculator brands to this day. What was it though exactly that made Casio's calculators different from those that already existed? Well, calculators of the 1940s worked using gears and were operated using hand cranks or motors. Casio though would set out to make calculators using solenoids and successfully created Japan's first desk-sized electromechanical calculator by 1954. The next pivotal step towards the creation of the PV-1000 would take place in 1957, when the company became known as Casio Computer Company Limited. That year, they launched a calculator known as the Model 14A, the world's first all-electric compact calculator, based on relay technology. The transition from a smoking paraphernalia to electronics brand could not have been better. By the time the 80s had rolled around, the company had diversified into selling a whole range of different electronics, from digital wristwatches we all know and love, to electronic musical keyboards. Interestingly, from 1983 onwards, a keyboard range known as Casio Tones would feature a cartridge slot for ROM packs which contained different musical sheets. So using this exact same style technology, it is of no surprise that Casio would develop a cartridge-based console too. The Casio PV-1000, which also saw release in 1983, housed a Z80A microprocessor and featured 2 kilobytes of RAM. In comparison to the likes of the Famicom that hit the market in Japan that exact same year, the technology is very basic. Graphically, the system is more comparable to the likes of the ColecoVision, and personally, I wouldn't even say it's that good, and sadly would not offer consumers much in the way of unique selling points. Away from the system's innards, and onto the system's sexy exterior, I feel that the platform has a decent aesthetic look to it, and for its time does not look as babyish and toy-like as the Famicom, CassetteVision or SG-1000. And to be fair, appears to have aged better in that department. The design all in all looks quite grown up in comparison to most other consoles of its period, but in many ways you could argue that this could have even contributed in some ways to the system's downfall. This basic platform featured 2 controller ports which could be connected to joysticks. The joystick that came with the device featured 1 button atop the stick, along with another 3 more buttons along the bottom. In my opinion, the controller has quite a nice feel to it. As mentioned earlier, the system had a lot more than just the Epoch CassetteVision to go head to head with, and now needed to compete with the likes of Nintendo and Sega. Obviously, in this venture, this did not go down very well for Casio, and as a result, the PV-1000 is now renowned for being one of the worst selling games consoles of all time. Throughout the platform's short lifetime, a set of cartridge-based games were sold, each numbered 1 through 15. Games featuring numbers was a common practice at the time, and systems such as the MB Microvision, Acetronic and Fairchild Channel F all shared this same game numbering convention. In terms of the PV-1000 though, although there are games numbered 1 to 15 on the platform, only 13 games were ever released on the system, with games number 8 and 13 never seeing a release. As demonstrated from the footage playing now in this video, graphically, PV-1000 games are crude and simple in comparison to what could be played on Nintendo's hardware. The system offered little wow factor in regards to what it could do, which all in all would contribute further to this basic system's demise. Overall, the story of the failure of the PV-1000 is as simple as they come. This was simply a system that was ill-prepared and ill-equipped to take on the likes of the Famicom. If the platform had arrived many years earlier, then perhaps things could have been different, but on release in 1983, the platform was doomed on arrival. To be fair to Casio though, the company recognised their mistakes very early on, and knew there would be no possible way that the PV-1000 could ever achieve a significant market share, With this in mind, and the writing on the wall, it is said that the platform was completely pulled from shelves in just a matter of weeks, removing the PV-1000 from the console market as quickly as it arrived. Away from the PV-1000, amusingly, Casio also released a sister microcomputer platform known as the PV-2000, which featured a Sinclair ZX81-like flat plastic membrane keyboard. Yuck. According to my sources, PV-1000 games were not compatible with this platform, and instead the system had its own 11 cartridges released for it. Moving through history, this would not be the end of Casio's venture in the console and computing arena, as the company would go on to release the PV-7 and PV-16 MSX computers, and the Casio Loopy game console, none of which panned out quite how the company would have wanted either. But these are all system stories for another time, as today has been all about remembering the PV-1000. So ladies and gentlemen, that was the story of the Casio PV-1000, the Japanese company's first failed foray into the home console market. If you enjoyed this video, I produce videos like this on obscure consoles every single week, so be sure to like, comment, subscribe and hit the notification bell to support this channel and never miss a video. Finally, my cult is funded by the fantastic support I receive from its amazing cult members, who continuously go above and beyond to preserve this cult's life. So shoutouts to Carl Johnson, Shizuku Kobayashi, JD Robbins, Greg Hooper, Seabass the Great, Spaces, Kevin Verhaley, Andrew Bazansky, Edward O'Reilly, Tom Elliott, Marcus Hines, Quang DX, Spudgemat B, Michael Baker, and all of my other cult members. Thank you all for changing our lives.